Hi, so my name's Geeta Dayal, and I'm here from San Francisco. I just got here yesterday. And we have right here is two really incredible people. Dieter Moebius, who is one of my favorite electronic musicians in the world. I mean, it's hilarious how many of his records I have, but he was probably best known as being one half of the incredible group Cluster. And to say a few words about the sort of Krautrock Moniker that sort of came up over the years. It's sort of, it's an odd word, of course, and it's also an odd word to use for so many different bands that sounded so different. So that term has come to encompass everything from, say, the rock and roll of Amon Düül 2 to the really kind of ambient electronic experiments of Cluster to, say, to Noi, to Can. So all these different bands that are just encompassed under this blanket term. But one of the things that hopefully we'll see tonight is how immensely varied this music was. And if you even look back at Conny Plank's discography of all of the bands he worked with, it's an incredible array of beautiful music, of all different kinds of music. So anyway, Dieter Moebius also made many incredible solo records, some of them, and worked very closely with Conny Plank, and did several records with him as a collaborator, and was one of Conny Plank's closest friends. And he continues to make great music today, and you'll be hearing that later tonight. On my left, you're right, here's Stefan Plank, who was Conny Plank's only child. And he has this amazing life story of hearing, and he's a filmmaker who lives in Berlin, but he has this amazing stories that he's told me of being a young child and being in one of the most famous studios, living in it, basically, in the whole world. And, you know, hanging out as like a 7 or 8-year-old kid with people like Annie Lennox and John Fox, and, you know, thinking of these people as your friends, your buddies, because they're over for dinner all the time and whatever. So he just has this incredible story. And when he was very young when his father died, he was about 13, and he'll talk a little bit more about that, but Conny Plank died in 1987, leaving this massive, massive body of incredible work. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. So I'm going to start with Stefan. And Stefan, if you could tell us, what are some of your earliest memories? You have a lot of funny stories and interesting stories of what it was like to grow up with Conny Plank as your father.
Well, it was just a normal father to me. To most of the people, he was something special, something weird. But to me, it was Papa, and it was really nice. And he always had these interesting ways of teaching me some stuff about life. Like, for instance, I came home with a bad grade in mathematics. And he looked at it, and I got a bad grade because I didn't. You had to write out the numbers, and you had to write out the way how did you get to the final, and I didn't do this, and that's the reason why I got a F. And he looked at this, and all these other musicians were in the room, and they all instantly had this feeling when, like, you come home and you have to show your parents a bad mark you got in a school, and the room got really tight, and everybody's like, oh, now he has to say something bad to his son, and everybody was like, my father read this, because it was an F, he had to sign it, said brilliant, and gave it back to me, and everybody was like, oh.
So I remember you telling me this funny story of your father talking to you from behind a wall. and talking through a hidden speaker.
Yes.
And going, Stefan, like that, like the kind of pranks he would pull on his own family.
It was when the vocoder was new, and actually I was sitting on the toilet in the yard, and I could look down there, and there was a window from the studio where you could see me, and I was sitting on the toilet looking outside, and he would talk through the vocoder and says, Stefan, hello. And I was like, he's like, this is God speaking. And I was sitting there saying, Papa!
So moving to Dieter for the next question. What are your earliest memories of Connie? Talk a little bit about how you guys first met.
Oh, hello. We met by accident, really. He worked in a studio in Cologne, and in the very beginning of Cluster, we were invited to record 2 LPs in one night. And Connie happened to be the engineer in that studio, so we met there the first time and had a long night, and in one take we recorded these 2 records, and I think Connie knew that this is not the end of our collaboration, because he liked what we did, and it was quite heavy, loud music, and all improvised. And of course it was not the end of the collaboration. It went on for 20 years or something like that, no, 15.
So can you talk about what your memories were of, of course Connie had this famous home studio, but before he had that famous home studio, he was making a lot of he was doing a lot of these incredible early recordings without that fancy home studio. So those first Neu albums, the first Cluster albums, the first Kraftwerk albums, he did with this sort of mobile setup that he had. And I was wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about what it was like to work with him before he had all the fancy gear and the big place.
But I'm talking about the time when he was working in studios, and he war angestellt. He was employed in these studios. And he had not the possibility to choose what he will record. So he didn't choose us, but he didn't choose a lot of other people that he was working on. And when we talk about Connie, he recorded German Schlager music as well. And he didn't want to do it, but he had to do it because he was an employee in these studios. But I think he even did a good job with the Schlager music.
He made it super weird.
No, not really. I might want to get in there, because I just found out that he did the original recording of Drafi Deutscher Marmor, Stein und Eisen bricht.
Which is a very big hit. Still.
And what he did was, he was, at this time he was in Hamburg and was working in a recording studio. And in the daytime, in the 60s and in the early 70s, in a recording studio, you would work from 9 till 6 p.m. and that's it. And he made a deal with the owner of the studio that he could work in the studio in the downtime. So from 7 p.m. till 8 a.m. But this was the time when there was no Total Recall desks. And he had to figure out how to work with this. And this is, as I'm doing the movie about my father, I'm really getting into the nitty-gritty about this. And he was living in Hamburg because Hamburg is one of the biggest press cities in Germany. And they had the overnight developing service there. So what he did, he would take a picture of the desk, how it was set up, and develop it overnight, and have a dia projector above the desk, so he could project the picture back onto the desk, so he could reset the desk to the session he was working on during the day. Sorry.
Yeah.
No.
That was so he could save his work in the days before digital. So you would, take an exact image of the desk. You'd see where all the faders were and everything. So you could go back to that location later, presumably. And going back to Dieter for the next question, you have said, you said to me before that in a way, Connie was like the third member of Cluster. Can you talk a little bit about what that meant to you, or how Connie was sort of like a third member of the band?
He was, of course, the third member, because when he invited us to come in his studio, we didn't have to pay $1 or £1 or one Deutsche Mark. We came there for free, and we had food, and we had accommodation, and he had to show us a lot of things about the gear that we could use for free, and he had much more sophisticated synthesizers and all kind of gear that we didn't have. But he had to show us how to use them, because some of them were quite complicated to handle. And so without him, we never could have realized these records. And it was just normal that he was the third band member.
And you told me that he would also, when you guys were on tour, he would carry your stuff for you.
Yeah, he came along sometimes, and he mixed us, and he helped us a lot, because he was big and strong. And of course, Rodelius, the partner in Cluster, was also big and strong, but I was a little bit small.
So there is this. It's funny because for many bands, he was sort of like their third member, or the secret member in a way. For example, with Neu, he really he had many contributions to the sound of Neu, this sort of pretty timeless sound even today. But one of the things that I was told was that, Neu had just like endless tapes. They just had tapes of all these jams, just endless jams. And, Connie had such good ears. He could like listen to all of these sort of endless jams and pick out, this is going to be the part that's going to be the song, or this is going to be, he was really good at having a really artistic side with the material as well. It's not just his technical expertise, but also really the creative aspect of it. Can you talk a little bit about, so Stefan's working on a major documentary about his father, but some of the sort of creative side that you saw on top of all of the gear and the mixing desk and everything, the creativity that you might have seen displayed in various ways.
Well, he wasn't too much hands-on. He wasn't a hands-on producer. He would get the idea out of the musician without telling them what they have to do. He would give them a comfortable surrounding and say, everything is all right, just let it out and we see what happens. And by this he gave them the possibility to release their material to the world without forcing them and without giving them straight lines. You have to be in this boundaries to work with me or something like this. He would just say, let it flow, and then we see what happens and what we can do with it.
Yeah. Another thing that I heard when I interviewed Brian Eno, I don't know if he's here tonight, is he? He said that he said he was healthily opinionated. Connie had no hesitation in telling you when he didn't like something, and he wanted to be surprised to hear something new. And that's the opposite of what a lot of engineers and producers are after. They want to make something that sounds like something else they've heard. Connie always seemed to enjoy the idea that something we didn't yet recognize would appear. And do you have any memories of this? As like his strong opinions about stuff? Like, I really like this, or I really hate this, or just this attitude?
As you say, I don't remember so well this side of Connie, because he knew how we would do it, and it was the kind of music he would do as well. So we just had a perfect communication, and of course everybody of us would say, oh, that's a good thing as well, Connie as Achim and me, and so it worked together quite well, and I don't know how it worked out with other groups, so I don't know that aspect.
Can you talk a little bit about, outside of your work with Cluster, how many of you guys have heard some of the albums that Dieter Moebius made with Conny Plank towards the end of the 70s and the early 80s? There are a couple of really great records. One of my favorites is called Zero Set. Has anyone have heard this album? And I was wondering if you had any, you could reminisce at all about that time. Because these are some of the craziest records I've ever heard. But one of the things you really hear on these records is this, you can hear Connie kind of playing the mixing desk like it's a live instrument. Like, really playing it. And it is such a strange album, but it's also a very kinetic album. You can hear all the stuff that's happening. Do you remember anything about this time period?
We were two people to mix, and it was not an automatic mixer, so we needed 8 hands at least. Normally we would have needed 24 hands because it was 24 tracks, and so we tried to not use 24 tracks because it was much easier to mix. And we always did it when Connie had no other work to do. So it was like his holidays. Sometimes it was a week, sometimes even more. And so for him it was really relaxing, and we could begin when we wanted and we finished when we didn't know anything anymore. So it was for him really relaxing, and for me it was more working.
There was, when I interviewed John Fox, he said that the mixing desk would also often get used as a sampler. So Connie had this custom mixing desk, this custom modified mixing desk, which was sort of the centerpiece of the whole operation. And that he had also used it as a sampler. So he would isolate certain notes, record them onto a tape machine, and then loop them so they played continuously, then re-record the notes on separate tracks of multi-track tape, and then he could replay all of the notes selectively through the faders. So literally turning the mixing desk into a musical instrument and sort of anticipating the polyphonic sampler to come. Can you talk a little bit more about, Stefan, about the kinds of custom modifications and crazy things that you saw in the gear? Because after his father died in 1987, and then after his mother died some years ago, Stefan had the very difficult task of having to go through all of these things and all of this gear and all this stuff. It was this Herculean task. But what were some of the things in that you noticed going through all of these things and all this stuff? What were some of the things that really surprised you, that you saw or that you found?
Well, let's start with the tape loops, which amazed me when I was a little boy, when I was like 4 or 5 years old. To imagine a tape loop, it's quarter-inch tape, which is run over something like this.
Mic stand.
Mic stand from the tape machine, and it's so long it's moved through the whole studio. So, and in the end, it's a bobby which is spinning. And so the tape loop is running continuously, and you can imagine as a little boy you're really fascinated by this, and you really want to touch it. And that's the only thing you're not allowed to do. You're allowed to watch, but not touch. And I was really amazed by this, and I enjoyed it. And I have quite vivid remembrance when I thought that my father was working on the organ, not on a mixing desk, because when he was doing this polyphonic stuff, he could go, and it was amazing for me to see. Well, some of this inventing stuff, one part of him being a producer and a technician, he was making some sounds possible. You have to think back in time, in the early 80s, MIDI was just about to come around, and they had really massive problems synchronizing stuff. And as he was a schooled electrician as well, he could figure something out to make it sync. So I found tons of these boxes which he made just for one synthesizer to speak to the other, and it's a MIDI plug here and a MIDI plug there, and in between he had figured something out so they would communicate together and it wouldn't go out of tune.
Wow, that's very impressive. What were some of the other ones? I remember this quote of how Conny Plank had rerouted the channels on his mixing desk in order to the quote was to pan an instrument left and right, as well as dry and wet with only one fingertip, to make it sound like a guitar solo was flying through time and space.
It's the quad sticks.
Yeah, this is the quad sticks. So it was, I was wondering if we could maybe talk a little bit more about this fabled mixing desk.
The mixing desk was a continuing project. When he first opened up Conny's studio, he built the Mark I of it, together with all his siblings. Even his mother was welding something together. And when it was ready, the next day they started recording Autobahn. And he continuously kept updating this desk. Then in between he had an MCI desk, but he was still working on his own desk continuously. And the desk is now actually here in London with Mark Ralph, which is maybe already here. Mark? No, so, no, Ralph.
And he had also rigged a radio transmitter in his car so that he could drive around in the forest and hear what he had just worked on in the studio that day on like a relaxed country drive, to think about his day's work. And this was all back in the late 1970s.
His idea about this was that every sound technician has his preference speakers. And at this time, Mercedes-Benz had a really big mono speaker, which is about this long, which was sitting on top of the dashboard, and he really liked this. So, as well, he noticed that by transmitting a radio signal, you get a certain kind of compression into the material. But he was producing actually for this moment when you're in the car and listening to the music, so he wanted to test it out before it was actually played by the radio. So he went to the lengths of building his own pirate radio station so he could listen to it, and he amazed some musicians, like when they did the mix, And they said, let's go on a drive with the car and listen to some material. And then they would put it in the cassette player, la 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 la. And then he would stop, and there's the scenic moment, you see the moon, la 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 la. He would turn on the radio and tune it into a certain static where it goes whoosh. And then he would look at the watch, and then his assistant would press play on a certain time and start the transmission. And then the musicians were like flabbergasted, like why is our music now played in the radio?
Yeah, Brian Eno said that I was impressed not only by the idea, but that by the fact that he must have secretly synchronized watches with somebody in the studio so that it started playback at exactly the right moment. That was very Connie. Did you ever have any of these experiences?
Yes, he had to plan to travel with me to Peking, I think, and go to the radio station and play our music and record it by shortwave radio with a microphone in his studio. So he would have all this sphere sound coming through the air and record our music that is sent through the universe.
My father was really obsessed with this really radio receiver, and back in those days there were lots of channels in this radio where you could. It was not even allowed to have in Germany. It was illegal because you could listen to police radios and everything, and there were certain channels which, and I think they're still on, some of them at least, where there is a voice which just reads numbers. And he was amazed by it, and he would have it always in the recording room. He would have this radio. Sometimes they would just tune in and see what's on, so maybe it's something they could use for the session.
That's pretty amazing. And I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about Autobahn by Kraftwerk, because that is, I'm pretty sure everybody here has heard, that's not a sample from Autobahn actually, but I'm sure everybody here heard the 22-minute version of Autobahn from the LP? Like the really, like, that's, because most people know sort of the radio edit version, but it's one of the weirdest pieces of music ever, really. I think it's just an incredibly weird piece of music. And Connie's fingerprints are all over a lot of Kraftwerk's early work, but that's probably like the real high point was Autobahn. And could you talk a little bit about, did you discover anything about this when you were going through?
Well, when I first decided to do this film, I decided that I will have to really dive into the work of my father. And I had the luxury of just going to his record collection, just taking all the albums out and listening to them. And I had the same experience to listen to the first time to the full version. Because when it was recorded, I was like 0 years old. And after the recording, Kraftwerk wasn't such a big thing in our studio, and the name was not really mentioned often. Yeah. So I got in touch with Kraftwerk and even the first 3 albums of Kraftwerk like 4 or 5 years ago. So listening to these albums was like really like, what? Wow. It was really amazing because it sounded so up to date. The recordings didn't lose, some music ages well and some is just in the time. But for me, but this is maybe just me because I'm connecting with my father, it was like such a timeless experience to listen to these albums.
Yeah, and one of the things that I find very distinctive about Conny Plank's productions is that they sound very modern. They sound very new. A lot of music from the 70s sounds like the 70s, you know what I mean? Or music from the 80s, you date it and you say, that sounds like the 80s. A lot of times, like the drum sounds make something sound like from a particular time period. But the way that Connie recorded drums. I mean, it was this very rough live sound that he wanted, and it still sounds very current. It sounds very modern, and those albums don't sound dated. They sound really ageless. And Dieter, I was wondering if you had any kind of thoughts about kind of Connie's philosophy about the way he liked to record you or work with you. Like, do you have any memories of what he would say or how he would think about these things?
No.
No? But maybe you have some recollections of, I mean, I know we're digging back like 30 odd years, but maybe in comparison to other producers and engineers you've worked with over the years, because you've worked with a lot of other people after Connie died.
Not really.
Well,
Not really.
you've worked with a few, and especially recently. What's been your, to you, what made Connie sort of stand out among all of the people you've worked with?
Help me. It's so difficult to answer this question because I never thought about it, and also, in this time I only worked as a producer with Connie, and the rest of the time we worked alone in our own studio, and we were our own producers. And also after Connie's death, I worked alone in my little studio, and I didn't have any producer, so I can't compare really. And nowadays, the only difference I can tell you is that now the one you talk about, Tim, for example.
What was it like to work alone after having worked with Connie for so long? Did you feel like...
I felt very lost because I didn't have this guy that knows about technique and knows about to handle the sounds and things like that. And nowadays, when I see these producers sitting in front of their computer recording studio, which is totally different work, it's great to be able to work like that, but it's really the big total difference. It's incredible what you can do today, but it's also a little scary because there's really nothing you can't do in a way. Everything is possible, even if you don't want it. I like mistakes, but nowadays if I make a mistake, a producer could just take the mistake and put it on the right place or things like that. And it's not always so good to take away mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you have any memories of Connie, not as for his technical skill or his work as a producer or engineer, but just as a friend? Because you were such good friends with him. What is a memory you might have, or a story you might have of just you and him hanging out as friends? Like, what was something that you remember?
When I was in the studio, we would perhaps not work, we would go for a walk, and we would play ping pong or things like that, and then work again, and I would steal his little three-wheel bicycle.
Tricycle.
Drive around the courtyard, and he will yell at me, "Give me back my..." Things like that. They don't have to do anything with music, and it's just private in a way.
Yeah. And what about you, as a child? I remember you telling me this story about how you always associated listening to Ultravox with playing horse with your father, but just memories like that you have of being young and having this person as your father.
Well, what I remember most about my father is his laugh. He had this kind of laugh which would just it was an infectious love, and he had a really nice sense of humor. Now I understand some of his jokes he made when I was little. Like there's a recording of DAF called Ein bisschen Krieg, and this was recorded on the very day Nicole did win the European Song Contest with the song A Little Bit of Peace. And the Duff song is called A Little Bit of War. so he enjoyed these kind of things, like responding to pop culture in a different kind of way.
Yeah, and I guess we should end this now because we're almost at time. But one of the most distinctive quotes I remember from all the interviews that I had read was this concept that craziness is something holy. What Connie would say, that craziness is something to be celebrated in music, that he would get upset when music wasn't crazy enough, like or he would get bored. But you'd think back at how many different records he worked on and how interesting and how cutting edge so much of this music was. I mean, another underrepresented aspect was he was working with rappers too. He was working with people like Houdini. And so he was working in a lot of this music in its very early stages, like 82, 83, like right when this music was starting. So he sort of had his finger on the pulse of a lot of different scenes, whether it was synth pop, whether it was, so-called krautrock or experimental electronic music, but all of these different things, hip hop, really big pop records, everything. So it's just so incredible to delve back into that amazing, crazy life story. And so now we're going to have a lot of great music tonight, and including the crazy music of Dieter Moebius right here on the stage, and many others. So thank you all very much, and thanks to Stefan and to Dieter for their amazing memories.
Thank you.